Hello, everyone. Welcome to our second episode of Tech Tuesday. I'm so excited to have these two guys on tonight. My name is Carrie Phillips. I am the master electrician at Farmers Alley Theater. And yeah, let's get started, shall we? If you want to interact with us and comment, which we would love for you to do, please go to this link right here, streamyard.com/Facebook, and give StreamYard permission to use your name. That way we know, who you are when you comment. We also want you to subscribe to all of the many social medias that you can subscribe to, Twitter and Facebook and YouTube channel and Instagram. So please follow us on all of our socials, and we would love to interact with you there as well. So let's do this, shall we? Let's have a conversation this evening. Welcome. First up, our first guest tonight is a really, really wonderful, really pretty, like, Kalamazoo famous. You know what I mean? You know how Kalamazoo has that, like, famous, actually both of our guests are pretty famous tonight, so I'm feeling a little starstruck. Our first guest is Western Michigan University Professor Emeritus D. Terry Williams. And our second guest this evening is Dean of WMU's College of Fine Arts, Dan Guyette. Hey, guys.
Hi, Carrie.
Welcome. Thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you for inviting us.
Absolutely. Thank you for having us.
So in addition to your roles at Western, past or present, you guys are also both on the board of Farmers Alley, correct?
Well, I was.
You were.
Until last spring, a year ago, I was on the board from the origins up until last spring for 10 years. It's hard to believe it's been over a decade, but yes.
So how did you get involved with Farmers Alley then, Terry?
Well, I got a phone call from Adam 11, 12 years ago, asking if he and Jeremy Koch could take me to lunch. And we went to Oakwood Bistro, and they told me about their plans to start a theater. And I said, "Are you serious? There's a recession." And they were dead serious. And I said, "Absolutely." They said, "Would you look at our business plan?" Which I did. I was very impressed. And of course, as the cliche goes, the rest is history. And I was not only fortunate enough to be on the board with some great, wonderful people, including my dear friend Kathy Muley and fellow director, but I also was invited to direct, and I've done 10 or 11 shows there, 7 of which have been with Dan. When Dan came to town as dean, he and I met, and he said, "I'm a scene designer." And I said, "Yeah, I saw your resume before you were hired. And I saw some of the models of the sets he designed. And I thought, boy, I would love to work with him." And we've had wonderful 7, I think it's been 7, hasn't it, Dan?
7 shows, yeah.
Really, at downtown as well as the little theater.
That's right.
And it's been great. I mean, I've always said there are 2 things that a director loves to do, and that's work with actors and work with designers. And I've had the good fortune in my career to work with some phenomenal designers, and of course, working with community theater actors, professional actors at Farmers Alley, and most of my shows have been with undergraduates at 2 universities. But I've always loved going to rehearsals. I love being the only one on opening night that knows where everybody was at the read-through. That's the greatest rush for a director, I think.
Well, you and the stage manager, but...
That's right. We're the only 2 people.
The only 2.
And then also meeting with really talented designers and getting their ideas. I think a lot of times the general public, of course, they don't come to see the process, they come to see the product. and they have no idea what goes on in the process, and nor should they.
Well,
They
Terry,
paid their money. They paid their money to see the final product. But I think once they understand what it takes to mount a production, and you usually get that one of the talkbacks. You say, for those of you who would like to stay, we're going to have a short talkback. And I'm always amazed how many people stay, and they want to know about the process, and they want to know how the set and the costumes and the lighting and the props came to be. The last production we did together, of course, they wanted to know the stage was full of cakes because it was called The Cake, and it took place in a bakery. They wanted to know which cakes were real and which cakes weren't. And but they always come up with questions that you didn't anticipate, which is a joy. And I think that's part of the love of coming to the theater, to find out how it all came to be in a matter of, they think, a few days, but it takes months. Production meetings and design meetings and so on. And sometimes they're very stressful, but most of the time I learn so much from the designers. And Dan certainly is the director's ideal designer, because he gets as passionate about his sets as I do about the rehearsal. And that's what you want. You don't want somebody that says, I'm just going to crank out another show. It's just another show. I've done many sets, or I've directed many plays, and it's just another, we have to crank this out. I've never had that experience with Dan, and I'm very lucky.
Well, it's very nice of you to say that, Terry, and I absolutely enjoy working with you. Absolutely, Terry's the only director I've worked with at Farmers in the 7 shows. I've done 7, and they all been with Terry, so it's been remarkable that way. And I think it's nice because you build a rapport of understanding of how to work together, and that gives you a shorthand, in terms of the design process, rather than working with somebody new. Not that that's not enjoyable as well, but when you have worked with a director or another designer on a number of shows, it does create a very comfortable process, and allows you to actually not get cozy with it, but push each other more, because you're more comfortable with knowing each other. And Terry and I certainly do that for each other. There's no doubts that our passion shows up in different ways, and we definitely push the envelope there both directions.
It does kind of seem sometimes like you guys can read each other's mind. And I don't know.
I think the more shows we did together, the easier it was, in terms of we'd be sitting there at a tech rehearsal, and I would say, that counter, and he would finish the sentence. I know it's going to be pink and not that color. I know. And then so I think the more you work together, the easier it is to read each other's minds.
And directors don't know that sometimes scene designers put things up there that are ugly just so they have something that they know they can change to make them happy too.
Like you just play a trick on everyone. So the first day, everyone shows up and they're like, oh, I'm going to focus on this really weird wall color. And you do that on purpose so they don't notice that there's something else happening over here.
Maybe.
The little details, that indicate to me as a director how much of a perfectionist Dan is. An example, I moved on the floor plan for the cake. He had a coffee cart stage right under the window or something, and I moved it stage left. It just, after a couple, you remember this, Carrie, after a couple rehearsals, I said it just fit better over there. And I talked to the woman who's playing the lead, the actress, the brilliant actress Zoe van der Haar, who's playing Della. And I said, how would you feel about and she said, oh, I like that better. And then I thought, when Guyette comes, the first thing he's going to say is, why is that cart moved? Which he did. He didn't disappoint me. Why'd you put the cart over there? And of course, part of me wanted to say, because I wanted to. But the other part of me said, Zoe and I talked about it. we didn't just do it haphazardly. And it probably sounds like to your viewers like it's a minor, like why would you spend time even discussing that? Because it was part of Dan's vision and aesthetic for the set, and I changed it. And I knew there would be a conversation, and I look forward to the conversation because it could have been the wrong move on my part as a director because I'm not the designer.
Mm.
And he could have talked me back out of it. And he said, well, let's see how it works. And it worked well with the actress. It worked well with the flow of the timing of her having to pour coffee, and it worked out. So I got by with that one.
So Kagan had one of the shows you guys worked together on was Disgrace, and Kagan wants to know what led to the decision to have a raked stage for that show. So
that's a great question.
Yeah,
for the audience that doesn't know, a raked stage is a slanted stage. It slants up away from the edge of the stage. That was Dan's idea, and I questioned it at first, but I'm so glad it was. Dan, you might want to explain why you wanted to slant that stage upward.
Actually, it was part of, if you think back to what that looked like, every wall and angle in that show was in what we call a forced perspective. All right. It wasn't a natural. The walls change heights over the length of the walls. And the whole idea is that the person, one of the lead characters in the show's view on the world was distorted from my point of view. And Terry agreed as we talked through the characterization, because you want your scenery, your costumes, your lighting to reflect the story, right? To enhance the experience for the audience so that they're getting more than just the text. They're enhancing the text. It's enhancing, what you're trying to say about the show. And really it goes back to the director's concept. So as we looked at that whole idea of distorting, raking, and forcing everything kind of into the lap of the audience, it makes you, as an audience member, have the sense that the action's coming at you more dramatically, more forcefully, by having it on a rake stage and having those forced walls, those angles like that. And it ended up working well. And we had a great technical director who was able to make that work. It's much more complex, as you would imagine, to build something like that.
Yes.
And for actors to even perform on it. It's actually, on an angled stage, it doesn't look that steep from the audience point of view, but when you're up there, it feels quite angled.
Well, we also he built that set, and we rehearsed it downtown before they moved it to the little theater. So the actors, I didn't expect that. I thought we would get there a few days before the tech rehearsal, and the actors would be intimidated by that set. But we had the good fortune to have it downtown, and then we moved it up to the little theater on campus. So it worked perfectly.
It's essential in a situation like that to be able to have your actors get comfortable. They don't want to be thinking about, new space or new props or new situations. They need to be focusing on their characters and the story. And so you don't want to take them out of that moment. So the more they can get comfortable and seem real in that world. This was their apartment. They needed to feel like it was their house. You couldn't be wandering around and tripping over stuff, or, wouldn't have looked very good at all.
Right.
So it's essential, I think that, again, that's one of the things. I started out as a performer, as many designers, I think, had some of that in their past. And that helps me think about what's it like to be an actor on this set? What's it going to be like to have to navigate this particular structure? Or how are they going to flow through here and get that elegance? And what kind of traffic patterns will this create for the director, which is going to say something in a subtle way to the audience as well, or maybe not so subtle, about how they move around the set. All of that is set up by the scene designer to allow the director to do those kinds of things that tell the story better. And when you have a director you work with well, those are the lingo that Terry and I will talk about. We'll look at it and he'll talk about, well, that traffic pattern here, can we open this up so I got a more of a direct line? And so you're talking about movement. And you're talking about
and also using that show Disgraced as an example, there's a moment in it when the husband has a meltdown and strikes his wife and cuts her lip, and we had to figure out how to stage that without her having to have a blood capsule under her tongue and all that stuff. So we decided it would be upstage behind the sofa. And so when he slugged her and she fell behind the sofa, while she was on the floor, out of view of the audience, there was a blood pack hidden behind the sofa that she could quickly put in her mouth. And when she staggered up, holding onto the sofa for support, we saw the blood. And that all had to be taken into account when you're designing the floor plan, the set, where the placement of the furniture. And I didn't have to tell Dan that because he knew, having read the script as many times as I did.
And having read your mind.
Well, how are we going to do that? Can the people in the first row see under the sofa where she is grabbing the blood pack? All of those factors have to be discussed way before the tech director starts building the set. You cannot just say a week before you open, oh, how are we going to do this? And why didn't we think of that? Why didn't you tell me this? Or why didn't we think of that a month or 2 months ago? That has to be factored into when they go out on the terrace to have a drink, or when somebody's coming in on the landing. All those factors have to be talked about.
So Dan, Savannah just had a question down there for you. What is your favorite stage orientation to design for?
Well, I'll answer that two ways. I think the one way, which sounds a little cliche, but it's very true, is the one that helps best tell the story of that particular play or musical. So sometimes the orientation has a lot to do with that. I also, though, do like to try different things, right? And again, it goes back to what I think will work best for this story, particularly in a space like Farmers or any other black box where you have the ability to seat the audience almost any way you want. There's obviously some restrictions in there, like any space, but it allows you to be in a 3/4 round, to be in a almost more traditional proscenium, to be in kind of a two-sided, like is often the orientation, a cabaret setup. So each of those is different and brings a different intimacy or relationship with the audience. So the one show, which is on my drafting board, literally right here to my left, that hasn't seen the light of day yet, is Lady Day. And that one was going to be a very different feel and look for that space too, a combination of being inside a cabaret of an old nightclub. And I think, I'm hoping that at some point we get to do that show, because that'll be yet another orientation that really haven't done that setup before. So I like variety. I like a little bit of everything.
So when you guys are disgrace the Christians and the cake, Julie can't pick a favorite. Do you guys have a favorite show that you've worked on at Farmers Alley?
Go ahead, Terry.
Well, I've been asked that question a lot over my career. I always give the same answer because that's the truth. It's the one I'm working on in the present.
That's right.
The one I'm researching, the one I'm thinking about. I read the play. Every time I read a play, and I think every director will say this. I don't know if every designer says it, but because I don't read a play with a designer's mind necessarily. Another question pops in my mind. Like, I never thought about this. Maybe I should research that a little bit. Maybe I should do a little bit more investigating of that profession of this character. If I'm going to ask this character to create a backstory, for example, I should probably do a little homework and create my own backstory for that character. What was she like? What was she doing before the action began? What was her childhood like, and so on. So that's just one of the joys of being a director, doing your homework. It's fun. It's great. So it's hard to say. All of the 7 shows I've done with Dan and the other shows with different designers, I love the intimacy of that space. And I thought when we moved to the little theater, I thought, well, this is going to be different. I rehearsed in that building years ago when we were building the addition to Shaw Theater in the 90s. I convinced one of our vice presidents to let me rehearse over there because it was being used for janitorial storage.
Mm-hmm.
The whole stage was full of mops and buckets and brooms. And they moved them all out. And I got to rehearse over there. And some of my colleagues got to teach over there. But I never got to produce over there. And it's a great little proscenium theater.
Yeah.
It's the only proscenium theater in our city of that size.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a gem. And our patrons, as you know, loved both spaces. They loved coming downtown, and they loved the little theater. So the shows Dan and I did, what did we do? 2 shows there, The Christians and Disgraced.
Mm-hmm.
And the other 5 we did downtown, starting with the Glass Menagerie. Our first collaboration together was the Glass Menagerie 5 years ago. The only of the 7 plays, the most classic of the 7 we've done together. The other ones have been very new plays.
Yeah.
And like in the last 10 years, they've been written. But Menagerie, of course, is 1947. Everybody remembers it from high school, reading it or seeing it. There have been a couple of films, television productions of it. And it was a beautiful production. Lanny Potts did the lighting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a beautiful, beautiful. And Catherine Wagner, the costume designer at Western, did those gorgeous costumes. And I had a wonderful cast.
Now, when Carrie asked me and he approached me, I'd been at Western a couple of years at that point, and he said, what have you thought about designing? And I said, man, I just don't have the time. It is, I know the commitment it should take, and I don't want to feel like I'm shortchanging anybody by just kind of, not being able to be there as much as I should. And then he told me he wanted to do Glass Menagerie, and I've used that show for years in my design classes because it's one of my favorite shows. And I'm like, oh man, he totally got me with that one.
But you had never designed it before, have you?
I had not designed it. No, just just seeing many student designs and thinking about all the things that different spaces again, right? And that's such a unique space for it. And it's not a design I ever thought about that show. I mean, the fire escape is so important. There's such certain elements that are key pieces of the show. But I always thought about it more of a proscenium type situation. So that was even a bigger challenge, which would made it. So that show certainly stands out as very special in my mind because it was the first one, and I got to do a show that I had been wanting to do for many, many, many years.
Well, I had directed that show in the 80s. On Shaw Stage, which is, everybody knows that's a 500-seat proscenium theater, where we had the fire escape go down into the orchestra pit.
That's cool.
But in terms of the 2 productions, the intimacy that show lends itself to worked so beautifully. And it would have worked well in the little theater, but I think it was perfect for the downtown space. There are never more than 4 characters on stage, and they're on briefly. Most of the time it's 3 characters in a living room with a little dining room inset, very intimate. And of course it's one of his 2 most famous plays, Streetcar Named Desire being the other, but they're performed all the time, and justifiably so.
Well, the most recent show that you 2 worked on together was The Cake, back in like January, February of this year.
The last show that
Farmers Alley recently sent out a survey to, I guess, probably everyone on the email list. So if you're on the email list, check your email. Please answer that survey. And we got a question from, a response from a woman. And she said, the last production I saw was The Cake. It was the best production I saw in 2020. The set was spectacular and outshone only by the acting. After, Zoe Vonderhaar stopped and sat and talked to me. It was the most fantastic event of the year for me. Thank you, Farmers Alley. So I wanted you guys to know
that was very sweet.
Very nice.
That your work is very much appreciated.
It was a joyful experience. You know, I have to tell, I've shared this with a lot of people. I sat at a production a couple of years ago at Farmers Alley. Sharon and I were there and getting ready to see the show. I can't remember what show it was. It wasn't one that I was directing. And we were visiting with people. It was in a cabaret format. I remember that. And we sat at the table with this other couple, and she said, I don't know sometimes what the titles mean. I never heard of these titles. We just know it's going to be good. And I thought, what greater compliment can a theater get?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, those are your ideal theater patrons. You want a theater filled with people like that. But we had a great time with The Cake. It's a wonderful play. It's my favorite kind of play. I call them social problem plays, where there's a topical problem that's explored, debated, maybe a controversial, some scenes that are pretty intense, and you're right there next to them. And I was blessed with a wonderful cast and a great design team.
So I want to switch gears here a little bit. So you guys are both educators, primarily or only at the college level. So how does being an educator affect your work as a designer or as a director? What have you learned from one job that you can apply to the other?
Clearly, I think for me, and I'm sure Terry will say the same, because of course we think alike. It's much more about process, right? Where it's really important for us, for the people involved, particularly since a lot of times our students are working with us, are in the tech crew, our assistant designers, or in the cast. And for, it's very important that that educational process of learning the profession still is a part of what we do. I think about when I'm thinking, do I really want to do an elevation for the show? Or do I think because I could just talk to the TD, do I have to do this? And I do it because I know that there's going to be students who are going to see that as an example of what should be done as part of the process. Now, I don't do everything I might do in some productions. I rarely do a model because it's not, we're doing unitized, usually one set shows. They're not as complex. They're in a small, intimate space. But other than that, you still, make sure you do and work through the process so that it's always about educating that next generation of designers. In the old days, before there were BFAs and MFAs, it was an apprenticeship program. That's how you learned, right? You took on assistants and they learned the process from you. And I think Terry and I still take that to heart. He always has an assistant director. I always have at least a charge painter, sometimes an assistant designer. And it's important that those students and those young theater professionals learn that process.
Well, I haven't always had an assistant director. I started having assistant directors in the last decade, I think. And they've been directing students from Western, dramaturgs, students that are interested in play analysis and in directing. And they're just another set of eyes and ears that I appreciate their input. And I said, sit in different places and look at the sight lines. And have I blocked this for one section of the audience at the expense of another section? And it's just, they've been very helpful. I've been very lucky with the 3 or 4 that I've had at Farmers Alley. But as Dan said, what I've been doing most of my career is working with young designers who sometimes initially are intimidated working with a faculty member and hesitant to chime in. But the faculty at Western, the faculty, and I'm sure Dan's true, they encourage the students to own the production. They're supervising it, they're overseeing it, they're mentoring, but they want the students to own the design.
That's right.
Yep. I try to do that with my high school students too.
And I think that's a huge onus on an undergraduate. to accept that they intellectually understand what their mentor is saying, but emotionally to work with a professor who's directing, or in Dan's case, the dean and their teacher. Emotionally, that's a huge responsibility for a 19 or 20 or 21-year-old to say, yeah, I know exactly what you mean. When you say to the student, they're getting the same budget that a faculty scene designer would get, right, Dan?
Right.
That can be overwhelming. But my colleagues, and I'm sure it's true now, even though I've been retired, were and still are wonderful at impressing that upon the students, that they're there to help them, but if they're going to own that production, then they have to go in hook, line, and sinker.
Yeah, and it's going to end up in their portfolio, right? It's going to be something they want to be proud to show, and they want to be able to talk about it and know what they contributed when they're out talking to prospective employers. And so it's all an important part of that process of launching their careers. So
then how do your guys' jobs change depending on the level of theater that you're working in? If you're working with in education versus community versus professional.
You mean switching from the educational to like professional theater?
Yeah, like Western versus Farmers Alley. How does your job change?
Well, for me, it's easier. It's easier because I'm not working with a student designer. I'm working with a professional scene designer and somebody who's been an undergraduate and gotten a graduate degree in scene design. And so there's no hand holding involved there. I mean, Dan and I mentor each other.
Yeah, I think with Farmers, there's still a number of our students that are there, so that's not wholly ever gone. But Carrie's correct that there's an expectation level of people doing their jobs without having to explain it to them, right? Like you necessarily would in educational theater, where we have new students and they don't always have that background or experience. You expect, if you've been hired professionally at an equity theater like Farmers, that the people you're working with are professionals. They know their job. And if they don't do it, then you will voice your opinion about that. So that's the difference, basically.
All right. So I want to take a minute to brag about you guys. Terry, I'm going to start with you. I asked you guys to send me things that you're very proud of. And Terry, I had a feeling that you have been asked this question a lot, because you right away, you had like an answer and you were like, yes, this is my answer. And so I wanted to brag about you because Terry has had the honor of building 2 theater buildings. Let's just say one of which may or may not have his last name on it, and hiring theater faculties at 2 different universities. I also wanted to throw another compliment your way, because I posted on Instagram yesterday that I was talking to you tonight. And one of my best friends from growing up, his name is Mike Rogers, he commented on it. And here's what he said. Keep in mind, we were in college. This is probably from a class 13 or 14 years ago. D. Terry Williams made me love and appreciate theater in the 2 intro to theater classes he subbed for. The man is compassionate and a genius.
Oh.
And I asked him if it was okay to share that with you. And he said, yeah, please do. He said, please. He opened up a completely different world to me and related it to a few different aspects of my interests. I just have so much respect for him. He won't remember me, but I will always remember him. His kindness and knowledge just left me in awe. I haven't seen him since that course, but I've always wanted to tell him thank you. So this is someone, you subbed for his class 2 times and you had that impact on him.
I love coming into that class occasionally to sub for Kate Thompson and others who've taught that class. It's much easier when you're asked to come in one or two times. You can pull out all your old corny jokes. Well, it was very nice of Mike to say. One correction: I have overseen the building of 2 theaters, but neither of them have my name on it.
Okay.
I mean, the building doesn't. The building
The
is
space
appropriately
does.
named
Yes.
Irving S. Gilmore because of the funding came from the Gilmore Foundation in honor of the late Irving S. Gilmore, and they named one of the rooms after me.
Oh, it's just a room, so it's not a big deal.
It's a big black room called a theater. So yeah. I'm very honored to have something named after me before I died.
It's only one of the largest black rooms of its kind in the country, but we won't point that part out.
Whatever.
Well, the wonderful sidebar about that, the guy who designed that space designed the theater that I did build at the University of Northern Iowa. And this was his dream black box theater, but we couldn't afford it at the University of Northern Iowa. We had to put the money where the proscenium theater was and then have a small, but it was a very nice black box theater with a mesh grid ceiling and all that stuff. But Ron, the late Ron Jarrett, wanted a big fly house over it and these motorized telescoping seats. And I said, Ron, we just don't have that kind of money. And and he said, someday I'm going to have the opportunity to design that theater for somebody. So when our late great president Dieter Haneke and I collaborated to raise the money for the addition to Shaw Theater, I knew that was who I wanted to have as our theater architect. And I called Ron in Chicago and I said, you're going to get your chance to build your dream theater. And he did.
So it's true, Terry. Not only do our students come to Western to realize their career dreams, even you had to come to Western to realize your.
That's right. That's a good way of putting it.
Absolutely true. Everybody out there, that's what you need to come to Western.
You got to come to Western to realize your career dreams. So I'm going to brag about you, Dan, now for just a minute. You actually gave me 3 answers to this question. The first one was, of course, the day you met your newborn son, which I feel like you can learn a lot about someone from the way they answer a question like this. So I'm gonna make sure that everybody out there in Farmers Alley, friends and family land knows how awesome Dan is, because that not only was that his answer, he also said that being the dean at WMU is the best career position he's ever had. And there have been many, and he's very honored to serve in this position. The third answer that he gave me, I'm actually going to let him tell you, because it's one of those moments as a theater artist that you don't necessarily get all of the time, and they can be very powerful and very feeding for us. So, Dan, I'm going to let you tell the story.
Well, I appreciate that. So, yeah, there are those rare moments that we remember in our career, and you can usually count on one hand where the magic of theater just perfectly comes together. And I was a young professor, head of the design program at Northern Colorado. And we were hosting the Rocky Mountain Theater Association, which I was president-elect for. And so we had hundreds and hundreds of professors and theater students there from all around the 5-state Rocky Mountain region, and including my graduate school professor and my mentor. And I designed a production of Sweeney Todd, which is one of my favorite musicals. And it was just one of those nights that it was 605 seats in the house. Every seat was full, all theater people. And it was one of those moments where it just went so perfectly. And when the lights went down, it was silent. I'm like, oh, crap, they didn't like it. And then it exploded. And when the lights came up for the curtain call, all 605 people were already standing. And it was just one of those incredible, it just went on and on. I mean, every single person, right from the chorus to the leads, deserved that standing ovation. And it really was just a real and I was sitting by my professor, and she was somebody who doesn't give up compliments. She was somebody, if you got an A from her, man, you got it. That was, she turned and looked at me. She said, pretty good job. And then the next year they did that production at Penn State, and she actually took some of my design elements into her production and credited me for it. That's how much she liked it.
That's awesome. What a
I know
compliment.
story. That's a great story, Dan.
It was a rare moment, and it's quite some time ago now. But yeah, you don't forget those rare moments like that.
Mm-hmm. So, do you guys have any advice for folks who are just starting out in theater, folks who want to be directors or who want to be scenic designers? Like, is there anything that you maybe wish you knew when you were first starting out in your careers?
Oh God, there's so much I wish I had. I wish I had read more plays. I wish growing up as young, I wish I had lived in a town that had more theater to go to. Yeah, there were a lot of, hindsight is always 20/20, but advice I have is if it's your dream, if you're passionate about it, then you have to follow it, then you have to pursue it. And for theater artists, I think it's important to read plays, to see theater, whether it's community theater in your church basement, theater at Western or the Civic or Farmers Alley, wherever that you need to go, hang out with theater people, ask them questions, ask your professors, ask your teachers, what got you involved in this? Why do you like it so much? What would it mean to your life if you weren't doing it? All those questions that I've asked my teachers and my mentors over my career. I value their judgment. I learned a great deal. I learned a great deal from my peers, particularly in graduate school. I love.
So what you're saying is I should go to grad school.
I loved graduate school. I in fact, after I got my PhD, after I defended my dissertation, there was one member of my committee that was not from the theater department at Indiana University. He was in the English department. He took me to lunch after I defended my dissertation. And he said, there's a fellowship open in the English department, a doctoral fellowship. And I told Sharon, and she said, I am not typing another dissertation. You're not getting another PhD. And that was that. I loved being a student.
I think if I had started over, Carrie, I fell into the theater. I think theater, to a large degree, like a lot of arts, is almost a calling. And if you aren't exposed to it, I didn't see a theater production. I was a sophomore in high school, and I filled in for a friend who was sick. And I saw Crucible 3 nights in a row, and I was bitten, and that was it. It was over. I didn't even go to college for theater to start with. I ended up being a college dropout, working for a while and transferring back to go to be a theater major, which my parents at first did not like too much. But eventually they realized that how much I loved it, and they've been great supporters ever since. But I would tell any student nowadays, if they have any interest, is to try to get on a run crew, to audition, to do whatever. Go and ask somebody, can I be your assistant? Can I just hang around and watch what you do? I'm just interested. So don't be afraid to just jump in and try it. It can be intimidating for some folks who maybe don't feel they know enough yet, but that's the only way you learn is right. Just kind of hanging around, watching and listening and asking questions. And Terry and I and everybody who's an educator in theater loves students and students of the theater who are like that. As you can tell from this evening, I'm shy about sharing our love about theater. So,
well, I mean, you said it, like that's why I get to do what I get to do, is because of Farmers Alley, and because I was doing shows at Farmers Alley, I met Lanny Potts, and because I went to Lanny Potts and said, "Hey, I think lighting is pretty cool. Could I help you a little?" And he said, "Great." He tested me. He asked me to cut some gel. And since I wasn't terrible at cutting gel, he was like, "All right, what are you doing next month? I need an electrician for Phantom of the Opera." And I was like, "What?" So that was, 2011, 2012? And here we are. So it really is, it's just ask.
That's right.
Ask. So we're hanging around the theater. That'll do it. Hi, Mike, by the way. So what are you guys?
There are a lot of stories about people. We had an alum, a friend of Dan's, Robert Maverick, who got interested in makeup design when he was an undergraduate here. Prosthetic horror films, creatures, monsters. He got a little taste of it here. He went out to Hollywood. Nobody was hiring. He showed up, started sweeping floors, making coffee. They said, well, there's no money in this for you. I know. I just want to hang out. And of course, the rest is history. 6 months, they hired him part-time. Somebody called in sick. Hold this, sweep that, fix this. And then 2 years later, he turns down more work than he can ever accept. Has his own studio.
Yeah. So is there anything that you guys are involved with outside of theater? Like anything that keeps you sane, that keeps the stress levels down? Any hobbies, anything that someone who is something someone's not going to know about you by reading your bio?
Well, I like to cook. We have an incredible 7-year-old grandson that's on the eastern side of the state, which I'm very sad that I can't hug, but we FaceTime all the time. I have a very talented son who's an artist, a tattoo artist, who's looking forward to getting back into his shop. They give me and Sharon great joy. And of course, Dan has an incredible partner in Danelle and his wonderful son, precocious son. Cooper is so curious and so on point with things. And he's got a great critical mind, Dan.
Yeah, tell me about it. Yeah, he certainly has no shyness in expressing it too. I'm glad he's on his best behavior, Terry, when he's around you and Sharon. Absolutely. I like Terry. I also like cooking. I'm an avid hockey fan. I have season
What's your team
every year? Well, the Broncos, of course.
Okay.
And that's obviously that I enjoy that very much. A couple of things that probably won't surprise. I grew up actually building models and loved modeling, and it served me well when I became a theater designer. And so I still love making, very intricate, small, detailed models. And I'm actually an avid bow hunter. I use a crossbow, and I'm a bow hunter. And so, those are things you probably, folks that know me do know that. Not a normal kind of thing, probably.
I want to tell you all a quick story. During the cake, it was an evening that Dan and his partner and his son came to see the show. And his son said that he wanted one of the props in the show was some Chick-fil-A. We had the Chick-fil-A bag, we had the little chicken nugget box inside. And,
I forgot.
And Cooper said that he wanted it. And so Terry at the end of the show just took it and handed it to him. And
Which is a huge no-no. As a director, I'm so embarrassed. You don't touch the prop.
And so I went, and I don't know what I thought, but I was trying to put away food props at the end of the show. And so I went up to Cooper and I just grabbed the bag, and Terry goes, "Oh, I just gave that to him."
You can't give away the props.
You can't give away the props. We need those.
Cooper, you don't know how close. Late at night when we were painting on that show, you don't know how close some of those other props didn't almost make it. Some of those cakes were real, as people know, and some of them almost didn't make it to the next day.
And the ones that were real were delicious. Oh my gosh, Jody Badalamenti did such a great job with all of those cakes.
Well, and all those cakes the audience got were from Sarkozy Bakery, made fresh that day for the audience that night.
Oh. Yeah, thank you for bringing up Jody's name, and a shout out to Jody, because that set and that show would have not been anything if not for her work and all of the hours and hours of creating those fake cakes and those real ones. And I mean, way beyond any designer's dream, what Jody did on that show. So
yeah, we are very, very lucky at Farmers Alley to get to work with tons and tons of designers who really love their job and really want everything to be right. And it's just really cool that we have been able to surround ourselves with those kinds of people. I think we're about out of time for this evening.
Well, you've been a great interviewer,
so
Carrie. Thank
is there
you.
anything else you guys want to share before we?
No, we just look forward to when we can be back.
Absolutely.
Me too. Me too.
Absolutely. It's nothing like, this is great, and we appreciate the opportunity to do this and keeping farmers in everybody's mind. But there's nothing like getting back to that beautiful little space and doing this in person. That's what it's all about. So we hope everybody's staying healthy and safe, and we look forward to that day.
Thank you. Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Carrie.
Thank you,
Tony.
Thanks, Carrie.
Yes, I want to thank Tony Mitchell, our incredible producer, for this. He has been behind the scenes, popping up comments, that kind of stuff, making sure that none of you in the comments are being sweary. I see you out there. We also want to make sure that, again, that you like, follow, subscribe, all of our social media, our YouTube. If you ever want to watch anything again, if you've missed any of our live content, it's all on Instagram TV and up on YouTube. You can also find it here on Facebook in the video section. We also ask that if you feel so inclined and you would like to donate to the Farmers Alley Theater COVID-19 Emergency Relief Fund, so that when we do come back, because we will be back, we are back with just as much power as we left. That link is down below. It's farmersalleytheater.online/give. That will take you right to our donation link. What else? Oh, Sunday. You do not want to miss. Sunday evening, we are doing Tony Awards trivia. So that is going to be super fun. I'm really excited to see what some of these folks know about the Tony Awards. It's going to be really great. So please join us at 8 p.m. on Sunday. And thank you again. Thank you, Terry. Thank you, Dan, for spending your Tuesday evening here and talking a little shop.
Our pleasure. Thank you, Carrie.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.